Okay, so now Dorian Fenton will take us through the past shapes future innovation. Take it away.
So good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you've been enjoying the previous presentations. So as Kim introduced, my name is Dorian Fenton, and I have taken 3 distinct innovations that we have developed through the years, and I have chosen these innovations because they have developed specific things in society that will lead to the technological singularity up the top there. So the first one I'm going to start with is the plow. Now, the plow is responsible for giving us specialization and division of labor. The plow is massively important in providing us with specialization and division of labor because it increased the ability to produce food. It was far more efficient. So before the plow, there were relatively few tools available. Food production was very labor intensive. It took the entirety of the family to produce enough food just to support them, and food surplus it did not exist. As you can see here, the tools that they're using are very crude, very inefficient. It was not easy for them to actually produce food. So after the plow, after the widespread adoption of the plow, there was a surplus of food. Now, the most important impact of this is, of course, the increased population. Now, other than just increased population, we have this trend towards urbanization. We have this non-food producing sector that doesn't have to be involved in agricultural production, and therefore they're going to congregate in a specific area, typically cities. Now, this congregation of skilled people led to another thing, and that was the ability to specialize. They didn't have to actually do anything in agriculture, and so they needed other activities. Now, not everybody is going to specialize in the same thing, and that is how division of labor was formed, is because they're all going to specialize in different fields. So, how many of you here have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Okay, a fair number of you. But for those of you who haven't heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's often portrayed in a pyramid right here. And it was a theory that he proposed in a paper he wrote in 1943 called A Theory of Human Motivation. Now, at the base of Maslow's pyramid, we have physiological needs. Now, what physiological needs are is food, water, shelter, your basic needs. Above that, you have safety and security needs. Now, those are a little harder to describe. It's basically, you know where your next meal is coming from, you feel safe, you have security. So, above that here, you have social and love needs. And what that is you have a family, you have friends, you interact with these people. Above that here, you have self-esteem needs. So you feel good about yourself. You feel appreciated. People understand your contributions to society and they appreciate you for it. And at the very top here, we have self-actualization, or I think it's called something different on this particular one, but it's self-actualization, which is you care about intellectual excellence and you care about the facts. So the reason I bring this up is the plow is responsible for bringing society to these bottom 2 tiers here. It's responsible for filling your physiological needs because you now have a surplus of food. You now have food, your basic needs. It's also responsible for helping fulfill some of the security needs because you know exactly where your next meal is coming from. You know pretty much you're going to be safe. You have a house. You have a role in society. And yeah, that's pretty much where that goes. So the plow is important because it brought society specialization and division of labor. Now, these 2 tools were very important in actually producing the next phenomenon, electricity. So electricity is very important because it has provided society with an alternative power source that has exponentially increased both production and efficiency. So before electricity, there was a few predominant power sources: wind, water, and animal power. Now, these were contingent upon the economic geography. You needed to have specific resources at your disposal in order to harness these power sources. If your factory needed a water wheel and you weren't located near a river, well, it just wasn't going to be powered. So the fact that these industry locations are very contingent on these resources being there made the pieces of land that had these resources very expensive and very desirable. Now, this limited your access to industry because if you were just a poor person, it doesn't matter how smart you are, you're never going to be able to have a factory due to the financial difficulty of it. So the first scientific breakthrough that brought electricity to the mainstream is the dynamo, which was invented by Michael Faraday in 1831. Now, what it did was it used a copper disc and it spun it between the poles of a magnet and used the theory of electromagnetic induction to create a direct electric current. Now, this was essentially the first generator. This generator design has been used over the course of the last couple of years as well. Any hydroelectric dam you see uses the same principles that Faraday's dynamo in 1831 used. Now, the next scientific breakthrough is the light bulb. So the light bulb, contrary to popular belief, is actually a Canadian invention. It was invented in 1874 by Matthew Evans and Henry Woodward. Now, their initial design just was not economically viable, it wasn't reliable, and it wasn't cost efficient, and therefore they sold the patent to Thomas Edison in 1875 for a sum of $5,000, which at the time was a substantial amount of money. So what Edison did was he took this original patent and he modified it. He added a carbonized bamboo filament as well as vacuum sealed the bulb, and this made the invention economically viable. It was now reliable and produced enough light and lasted a sufficient amount of time that it was widely adopted. So the societal changes resulting from the widespread implementation of electricity and the light bulb were the lengthening of the day. Now, because the day was longer, you had the ability to spend a lot more time on extracurricular activities. Other than just working, you had the ability to philosophize, you had the ability to spend time with your family, and this allowed for an entire host of new activities. It also increased efficiency and productivity because the location of these factories was no longer contingent upon the resources on their land. You didn't need to be located next to a river anymore. You could locate next to your market, something that was vastly more profitable. You could locate closer to your human resource, your workers. Because electricity was so easily transferred, it was easily transported, you could run electricity through wires, and this eliminated a lot of the power issues that they had previously had. This also increased the level of safety, not only in industry but also in households. Households previously used candles and oil-based lanterns, which were quite a fire hazard. By eliminating those and using the the incandescent light bulb, you now had an exponentially safer household. It was also safer to factories. Now, it didn't vastly improve the safety of factories because in the 1800s, your safety standards were still pretty abysmal. But what it did do is it allowed workers to be able to see the dangers, and it at least allowed them to somewhat improve the safety standards. So what electricity did was advance society up the pyramid a bit. Now you have the safety needs completely covered. You're safer in your household, you're safer in the industry. You have this social and love need also covered because you can spend more time with your family. You don't have just a limited amount of time during the day. And you start to move into this self-esteem need because you're producing things that people care about. You're starting to feel better about yourself. So electricity vastly improved society. It allowed us to be more productive and more efficient, and the entire idea of electricity opened the door for a vast amount of innovations in the future, one of which is computers and the internet. So computers and the internet are probably the most important innovations we as humans have ever come up with. The reason being is they will be the tools that we utilize to bring us towards the technological singularity. So the person who developed the idea of the internet, his name is J.C.R. Licklider, or Joseph Carl Robert Licklider. And in 1962, in a series of memos, he proposed the ideas of the internet. So how many of you have heard of the idea of cloud computing? Quite a few of you. He proposed the idea of cloud computing back in 1962, and we are just starting to utilize it now. The internet was under development in 1968 by DARPA, which is the Defense and Advanced Research Projects Agency of the United States. They pretty much do military applications. The only people who initially had any access to it were the science research community and government agency. So what the science research community was is essentially universities. Now, they initially used the internet to be able to transfer ideas back and forth, but initial versions of the internet were slow, cumbersome, and unuser-friendly. So as they developed the internet, they continually innovated it. So ideas such as packet switching and IP protocols were eventually implemented, and this helped the internet to become what it is today. The societal change resulting from the internet is huge. The increased availability of information is probably one of the biggest trends that we've seen from the internet. If you have any question, you could always type it into Google, and you could pretty much get an answer to anything in milliseconds. This has increased and has started a trend of globalization, the interconnected world. It's almost impossible now to distinguish between the contributions from somebody in, say, India to somebody in the United States based on computer contributions. Just looking at their work, you can't tell. And so globalization, or this interconnected world, you can communicate across vast distances in virtually no time at all. This has led to something called the flattening of the world. And the flattening of the world is an idea proposed by Thomas Friedman in 2005. Now, what the flattening of the world is it speaks towards a trend of outsourcing. Outsourcing is outsourcing a task to the lowest bidder. So any of this intelligent computer work that was typically confined to Western societies can now be outsourced to the lowest bidder across the world. So China and India, with huge human resource capabilities that previously were not overly economic players, now have the ability to outsource their technology, outsource their human resource potential. And this has greatly contributed to the production efficiency of society. This leveling of the playing field, this removal of the hierarchy, is what Friedman here refers to as the flattening of the world. Now, one of the biggest factors in the adoption of the internet is personal computing. And so personal computing is something that we pretty much all use today. Most of us have a laptop, most of us have a smartphone. But it didn't just start like that, it had to develop. So the first development in personal computing was the 1977 Apple II, which you can see right here. Now, this computer was the first mass-produced, widely available personal computer. And it didn't have a whole lot of uses, and it wasn't very user-friendly, but at the time, it was absolutely revolutionary. So this wasn't very user-friendly, and it didn't have a huge adoption rate. So in 1984, Apple again released another computer with the first graphical user interface for the general public. It wasn't the first GUI, but it was the first widely available one. And now users didn't have to type a command to delete a file. They could simply drag it and drop it into the recycle bin. This greatly opened up computing to the masses and allowed the general population to understand it. You didn't need a computer science degree anymore. Along with this widespread adoption of computers and their ease of use came software and hardware improvements. Now, computers were becoming more general, they weren't as specific, and this, in turn, opened up the amount of tasks that they could perform. In keeping up with this, you also had these hardware improvements, and it allowed them to do much more than just be computers. Moore's law dictates that technology doubles every 2 years, and so you can see massive improvements from just the inception of the computer in 1977, or personal computer, to what we use today. So the societal changes resulting from the adoption of the personal computer, one of them is automation. The more that we invested into computation, the more that we invested into these hardware improvements, the more we began to see that they had uses outside of just personal computing. They had uses where we could put them into a factory and they could perform monotonous labor far more efficiently, far more cheaply than any human counterpart ever could. And this also contributed to further specialization of the human race because we no longer had to do these monotonous things. We could have a computer do them for us, and this opened up a society where most of us are now getting secondary education, whereas previously it had just been high school. With this automation, we began to develop artificial intelligence, and it just continued to build from that specific base to where we are today. As you can see, computers and the internet have taken us to the peak of Maslow's pyramid. We now have fulfilled these self-esteem needs. Our neighbors care about what we have done. We feel good about ourselves. We have contributed to society, and we have moved on to self-satisfaction, or also known as self-actualization. We are getting a better education, we are caring about the facts, and we are caring about what happens outside of our immediate realms. We care what happens in the world. So computers and the internet were by far the most useful tool we as society have ever developed. They will be directly responsible for attaining the technological singularity. So as you can see, we started with the plow and specialization and division of labor. And how many of you have a smartphone? Most of you. How many of you know how to use it? How many of you know exactly how it works? Far less of you. Specialization allowed us to specialize into areas where the rest of society didn't have to know what we were doing, but it still advanced us as a society. And this allowed us to become more advanced and develop electricity. Electricity was hugely important. It increased efficiency, it increased productivity, it gave us a new power source that was easily transportable, and it opened the door for many new innovations and new fields of technology. From electricity, we can advance further down the path to computers and technology, computers and the internet. Computers and the internet have allowed us to become smaller as a world. They have increased the amount of interconnectivity, of our world, and they have allowed society to just become more efficient and produce cheaper things that allow us to interact with each other better. Now, from there, we sit on this platform. We have not yet come to the technological singularity, and I don't know exactly how we're going to get to the technological singularity. But we use these innovations from the past, and eventually they will lead to the singularity. Thank you for your time. Do you have any questions?
Questions?
Throw one in today. Thanks. First off, I really like the graphic you made there with showing the stairs and all the different steps. But so just right now, you just said we're on the level just below the technological singularity, and I just saw you didn't draw any stairs there. So what do you think is I don't know, an upcoming technology or something, or the analogy of the stairs that'll lead to the technological singularity from that next level?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. I personally believe that advancements in the field of artificial intelligence will progress us to the technological singularity. Once we develop intelligence that is greater than human and synthetic, there's going to be breakthroughs in far more fields than just AI. It's going to have far-reaching implications, and that will definitely help us progress to technological singularity.
I got a quick question. In terms of societal change, how do you think technology will, continue to change and shape our future? Like, as you can see with cell phones and everything, people hardly interact with each other in personal settings, I find, most of the time. And how do you feel like that's going to change in the future as we get more technology?
Well, I do believe that the world is becoming far more interconnected than it ever was. For example, we live pretty much on the internet nowadays. I don't see that as changing. As much as I like the idea of being personable, of us all interacting with people, I think it's probably going to be the complete opposite, where we essentially hide away and live on a computer. Or maybe eventually we get to the point where we can physically be plugged into the internet. And I think social interaction is probably going to disappear for the most part. It will have its place, but I don't think it'll be as prevalent as it is today.
You talked a lot about the pyramid and how each of these pieces of technology, I guess, has increased our free time and allowed us to pursue other things. So when we've got things like robots replacing humans for their jobs, what do you think is going to happen to that pyramid? Because right now, the way I have, I guess, my pyramid defined, my job would be part of that self-actualization. So do you think we're going to have to redefine, or what's going to happen in the future with that?
Well, I think as robots continue to replace the monotonous labor that none of us want to do, we're going to be free to pursue further avenues of interest. We're going to continue to specialize. Secondary education is already fairly prevalent, but I think it's going to continue to be far more prevalent than it used to. We're a society that values advanced jobs. Advanced education actually gets us these jobs. And very few of us actually aspire to work on an assembly line putting the same bolt on the same car 900 times. So I think as we continue to replace these jobs, it's going to free up more time, and we're going to further specialize.
Okay, I got a question to build on that one. So it really depends on like what you define as a mundane task, I guess. Let's say, you know, someone who's in it for the money to do surgery or something, obviously they'd want to have like a machine do it, you know, if they don't prefer to do it, you know, like. So like, what I'm saying is like, to what extent will robots exactly, you know, take over everything? Like, will we just be doing nothing and vegging out all the time kind of thing, or?
There's a lot of theories that go into that. Most of you have probably seen the movie WALL-E, where we kind of hang out and do nothing all day. I don't think society is going to get to that point where we're entirely sedentary and we don't do anything. I think as free time increases, personally, I'd spend a lot more time skiing. But as we continue to have robots perform our jobs for us, and as we continue to specialize as a society, I think the tasks that are really important to us, the things that truly give us joy, are going to be far more prevalent. You probably have a hobby, and I'm going to guarantee that if you didn't have to work or do anything as far as school went, you'd probably spend most of your time doing something like that. So as opposed to being completely sedentary society, I think we would all pursue our individual avenues of interest.
Okay, I got one more. So just looking at your different tiers you have here, definitely I agree with computers and the internet, should be out there. Electricity, yeah. I'm just wondering, like, mostly just for your own personal opinion, so why did you pick the plow in particular? I get that it's a lot to do with agriculture, but I'm just wondering if you thought of any even more primitive technologies like the wheel, something like that. Basically just why you chose the plow.
I chose the plow because it was an innovation that was responsible for producing a surplus of food. Now, there's other innovations like the wheel that did have a massive impact on society, but the fact that there was a surplus of food allowed for a non-food producing sector and essentially contributed to urbanization and specialization and division of labor. The wheel, yeah, it was a great invention, but it had nothing to do with the food supply. It made things more efficient, but it didn't have as far of a reaching effect as the plow did, and so I decided that the plow had more of an impact on society.
You talked about skiing. I think about surfing too. Do you think are there lots of these physical activities that actually no one will do anymore? Because as intelligence increases, one's wish to surf becomes less, because, you know, it's not very intellectually challenging most times. It's when a really big wave's coming at you, it is. And it's so, but I think you have a lot of insights about skiing. To what extent is skiing an intellectual pursuit? Will super sentient robots want to ski, or will they not enjoy skiing at all because it's physical?
I'm not sure if robots would actually want to do something like that. I know I ski for the adrenaline rush. It's a natural high.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if a non-biological system would experience something like that. So I don't know if robots would enjoy it. I know a lot more humans nowadays. There's a trend towards healthy lifestyles, physical fitness. And I believe if we had a lot more time to pursue that, it would continue to trend that way. Now you can see, again, there's going to be a complete opposite argument to everything like that. Obesity is also on the rise, but how often does the media cover somebody who's fit and not having any problems compared to somebody who's obese and costing the medical system a lot of money? I think it's kind of blown out of proportion that way, and I do feel like as we continue to advance as a society, each individual person's going to make their own choices, but I do feel like physical activities like skiing and surfing, as far as humans are concerned, are never going to be replaced.
You could build it into the reward system of robots. I mean, you could create a robot that by software wanted to ski.
Okay, sorry, another question. So what do you think will happen if we have more time? Because during like winter break, the ski hills are already crowded enough. Imagine if everyone had free time, Like every hobby will then be like super overcrowded to an extent, wouldn't it? And then they'd be super desired. So then only specialized people would essentially get to do their hobbies. And then everyone else will just kind of be like, crap, I gotta do another hobby now. And then that'll be overcrowded potentially. And then just trunnels until like you don't do anything.
Okay, so to answer your question, in the realm of skiing, yeah, the resort might be crowded, but the double blacks are always empty. I feel as you progress more into your specific hobby, as you get better at your specific hobby, there's going to be less and less people that are on your level. So yes, for example, the ski hill may be crowded, but it's going to be crowded on the beginner and intermediate runs. If you specialize beyond that point, blacks and double blacks are always empty.
Okay, so if it's like a bell curve kind of, what happens if the bell curve average just kind of pushes over to the super specialized area? With
So
technology and stuff enhancing everyone's abilities, you'd expect everyone to eventually get there. The pro level,
I guess at that point, if there's no challenge for you, if you're on a pro level, I don't know, try something different. Pick up snowboarding, pick up cross-country skiing, or develop a completely independent hobby of that. So videography or something along those lines. You'll never run out of things to do.
Is poetry a part of self-actualization? Will the absence of solitude and reflection and stuff, will this adversely affect us? Or will we just go on not ever having solitude and long periods for reflection and just never miss it? Because, who cares about poetry anyway? Or maybe there's a new style of poetry where you only think about a word for 5 seconds and put it down, and, poetry for dummies or something. I mean, when are we losing something by not being totally alone and in solitary, silent conditions where we can truly reflect on our own thoughts?
Personally, I don't believe so. You're always going to have that opportunity to be alone. Now, you might have to actually make the time as opposed to it being given to you.
Yeah.
But most of society feels that poetry is pretty much useless now,
Yep.
and yet there are still
Yep.
people who continue to write it. So
They do.
I think if you enjoy something, you'll make the time for it to happen. It might not, the time for self-actualization, the time for solitude might not be given to you anymore, but if you enjoy something enough, you'll
Right.
make time for it.
Yeah, if you were to ask most people whether they respect poetry, they don't. But if you ask them about song lyrics are like real important. And they're actually the same thing, of course. It just depends upon how you define things.
Were you aware that Maslow developed his concept of self-actualization after visiting an Aboriginal community in southern Alberta? And he saw the way in which Aboriginal children became actualized. That is the basis of Maslow's pyramid. He visited an Aboriginal tribe in southern Alberta and developed a system.
I was not aware of that particular aspect. Now, I have learned about Maslow's pyramid in a different sense in business courses and management potential. I just more or less adapted the idea to my purposes, but I was not aware of the Native American origins of that.
Yeah, my biggest worry is that how will people get paid when technological singularity will happen? So, doing anything and just sitting at home, will they get paid?
Well, as we progress, even 100 years ago, back when we did have assembly line labor, which is still fairly prevalent, but it's become more specialized. So as we continue to specialize as a society, yeah, we may not be putting on that bolt or that spoke over and over and over again on every single unit, but those machines that are actually doing it for us, they need maintenance, somebody needs to program them. So I think we will find jobs in other fields. I think we will, as a race, continue to specialize.
When you watch Star Trek, where they don't have money anymore, you begin to think that somehow that could work, but you really don't understand how. So, I mean, there can be other motivators. There's the idea that most of the things that you need would be so plentiful that, the era of scarcity would be over. That, what you need you can have, and when you consider that virtual reality is as good as real reality, any experience you want you can have. So, it is possible that the question, how will we get paid, won't make sense anymore when there isn't any money anymore. When we're completely a society that operates on some other basis. And whenever somebody suspects somebody else of a hidden agenda, it's almost always related to money. So that's going to change dramatically if we're not using money. What will you then suspect people of? What is their hidden agenda if there is no more money? That's going to be really fun. So, okay, thank you very, very much.